G'day Eagles fans, welcome back to True Eagle. Today it is the first time in a while I'm going to shift my focus more to the draft. Pick swaps and stuff can still happen, and obviously I want us to be active in that space. Trying to get a trade for another pick in the first round of this year's draft would be great. But in today's video I want to take a look more at the actual young talent potentially on offer at the end of the year. I think the draft is it's right before my birthday, so like late November, I forget the exact date. But I want to talk about potential candidates for specifically pick 12. I was going to do a whole draft video, then I thought I could talk forever because once I mapped out all the options for guys I like at pick 12, I realized that's a whole video in itself. So we can do another video for 26. I have got 8 names here. So I've opened it quite a bit of various players that I think could be suited to us and are somewhat realistic. There's one or two that will rely on a bit of luck to get to us, but different guys that add different value. So again, to get on the front foot with this first pick at pick 12 thing, I think the biggest thing we give up by trading 3 all the way down to 12 as opposed to say 6. It's just that we're not quite in that range of where the top midfielders will go, and that's something I thought, I'd hoped we'd prioritize. I'm not saying that to weasel a whinge into this video. I just want to make it clear that that is probably something that we do lose when we enter the draft at pick 12. So further to that, a lot of the names that I've got mentioned here, a lot of them are either potential midfielders or they play another role primarily and could become midfielders. I have picked a couple of talls in here. I don't particularly want to go tall with pick 12, but nonetheless, I've named them as options. Before we get into the video, I don't do a lot of asking for subscribers on this particular channel. I've kind of just let it sit and whoever wants to subscribe can subscribe. But I have noticed just over the last month, this has been the biggest month by far that True Eagle has seen. And the views that the videos have been getting, first of all, thank you. But second of all, they're far exceeding the amount of subscribers I have. And I had a look and only 39% of people who have been watching my content have actually hit subscribe. So if you find value in it and if you want to see more Eagles focused content, I'd really appreciate if you considered hitting subscribing if it hadn't occurred to you yet. But if you think I'm a total loser, don't even worry about it. Let's talk about, first of all, with pick 12, what our strategy should be with this pick. So what are our needs? Well, like I said, I really wanted a proven midfielder. That was the benefit of holding a pick in the first half a dozen or so. So we have to kind of accept, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think most likely we're probably going to pick a guy who isn't a proven midfielder. There just aren't, at the moment, in that range, any clear-cut midfielders. They've all got some degree of dual positionality and probably play another role primarily. But I would love to have someone who either has the potential to play midfielder or can roll through there. Specifically, I think where we're at the moment, we do kind of still need more running power and outside run. Now, I kind of believe when you are doing a rebuild, you kind of build from the inside out. So I don't necessarily think it needs to be a power runner that we pick with this selection. However, we do desperately need outside run, and there's a number of guys I think who could add that. So some running power, some guys who can get from contest to contest as opposed to just winning clearances, and guys with foot skills, which we were found lacking a lot this particular year. Using the ball inside 50, hitting targets, that is something that we would love to add. Midfield priority, but at worst, there's a couple of guys who play in defense primarily that I think could become midfielders, so we'll talk about them. For clarity, we have taken, as far as I can remember, 2 pick 14. So this will actually be pick 14 after a couple of bids. We expect a Levi Ashcroft bid and we expect potentially a Leonardo Lombard bid. So this actually could become 15. That ruins everything I was about to say. Ashcroft, Lombard and Kako probably go there. But for general guidance on what players we've gotten from this draft pick range, Duggan and Hewitt were both pick 14. I think Hewitt was a great pick, and Duggan, he's not an elite talent, but he probably still was one of the best players we could have picked at that range. I think there was like Lockie Weller, Jaden Laverde, Kyle Langford. I mean, I think Duggan was an okay pick given that. I think Hewitt's there on talent. Venables and Brander were both pick 13. On talent, I think the Venables pick was fine. Obviously, his career was unfortunately cut short, and we did miss with Brander at 13. So what are some other positions we'd consider with this pick? I think a couple of key backs I've thrown in here. It's not my priority. I do think we should probably go best available small player. Small just meaning not key position. And key back we can probably hit, with our pick in the 20s ideally. Really don't want to see a ruckman or a key forward or a small forward really in this year's draft, but there is one player who kind of is a small forward, but we'll get to that. Let's start talking about the prospects. Let's start with the one that continually gets linked to us in Bo Allen. He is linked to us routinely because he's West Australian, really. And, stylistically, he probably kind of suits us. He is a defender with midfield potential. He's played a little bit of forward. He's a big body. He's 190 centimeters, can play a lockdown role. Good contested player and has had exposure as a midfielder. He's WA captain as well. So it ticks a lot of the boxes, and I can see why people make that connection to us. I don't necessarily think we need to pick the WA kid. That being said, West Coast has said for years, when the talent pool is rated even, we will go local. But there's been plenty of times we've taken Victorians with our first rounders. And I think in the last 10 years, outside of Ginbey and Hewitt, I don't think we took a single West Australian in the first round. So it's not a safe bet that we'll take Beau Allen. It is entirely possible he's not available. I've heard Melbourne are also interested at pick 9. So look, for his attributes, it's hard to argue that he doesn't suit us. Again, not a proven midfielder, but we also kind of need a running defender anyway. So if that is his worst case scenario, he becomes a good defender, then that's not the worst thing. But I'll just speak to the fact that he's not necessarily a proven midfielder. I mean, Ginbey was a WA MVP playing in the midfield in the championships, and maybe he does become a midfielder eventually, but at the moment he looks like a defender. Do we want to spend this first pick on another Ruben Ginbey? And he might not even be as good. Probably not a pressing need, but they are a lot of similarities on paper between Beau Allen and Ruben Ginbey. And look, it wouldn't hurt to add another Ginbey. Toby Travalia is another kid that I like here as well. And look, there is some similarity in everything I just said about Beau Allen. Defender first, potential to move into the midfield. However, I think there's probably a little bit more with Travalia in terms of foot skills and distributing the ball up the field and driving more forward forays than, say, a Beau Allen. Beau Allen's foot skills can be probably a bit of a question mark. So they are kind of distinctly different players. So Travalia, I think, if both players are guaranteed to become defenders, Travalia is probably the one I'd prefer. He's from Vic Country, considered versatile. I think people are comparing him to Will Day, someone who started as a defender, but they think he can play in the midfield. Now, I don't have any real concrete evidence as to why he should become a midfielder, but Will Day's a nice prototype of the player that he could become. I like the idea of that. He's a chance to be available at our pick. A lot of mocks I've seen recently do have him available as late as pick 15. If he becomes a wingman, that's not the worst case scenario for us. He does have nice foot skills, good defender as well. So he's not one-dimensional in that sense. And I did also read, I think it was The Age, West Coast do like Travalia as a prospect. So read into that what you will. Another player that I really like is Xavier Lindsay. Now, he is more of an outside midfielder. He does play as that release defender as well, someone who can drive off halfback. But I do think he's probably the most midfield-esque. And look, if you read his description, he's got high football IQ, really good temperament, good work ethic, excellent skills. There's something a little bit Errol Goulden-esque about Xavier Lindsay. And of course, that is best case scenario. He's not necessarily going to become Errol Goulden. If he was, he'd probably go pick 1. But he finds plenty of the footy and he damages the opposition really well. I really like this kid. I think he would suit us really well. And I think because he would come into the team, not rely on a contested game, we wouldn't need to wait years before he gets big enough to play his role. He can play his role as a skinny 18-year-old. He's got a little bit of inside game, but primarily this is the guy you want receiving on the outside, kicking inside 50 or releasing off half back. I think Xavier Lindsay suits us down to a T. Is he necessarily a stronger prospect than Beau Allen or Toby Travalia? Not really, but I'm just saying I like Xavier Lindsay a lot. Let's go through a couple of taller options. Now, I've thrown these in here for balance to this video, but I don't think we should really be going for a key back with this selection, but let's go with 2. Alexander Toro. This one, he probably isn't going to be available, to be honest. He has been a bolter in this year's draft where, I think they said at the start of the season, a lot of people didn't know who he was, and people are now describing him as a top 5 to top 10 talent. I saw The Age did a mock draft where they actually consulted a lot of recruiters, and that helped inform their rankings, and they ranked Toro at number 3. So I don't know how many clubs are thinking he will go top 3 in this year's draft. It's probably unlikely, but we can assume that at pick 15, it's probably also unlikely he's not going to be there. But from what people are saying about his talent, look, he's a bit undersized at 193. That might grow. But he's a high-leaping, great intercepting defender with buckets of talent out of Vic Country as well. So it's a bit of a high-risk, high-reward one. I don't think it suits us at pick 15, but from a talent perspective, it's not the worst. He's played as an intercept defender, also played up forward, and as a defensive midfielder as well, which is interesting. So I don't know, does Toru become a midfielder at the next level? I don't know. That one seems like a long shot. But I think for balance, even though I had strong opinions about us trading 3 down to 12, I'm going to be less critical if we take a kid that I don't particularly want, because that's one where you can defer to the recruiters and say, hey, you genuinely know so much more than I do. Whereas the decision to trade pick 3 down from 12, I think anyone can have an opinion on that, because what we're just talking about there is the best use of assets. So if we did end up with a Toro, I'm not going to complain about it, but I do think we should go midfielder first or midfield potential. And the exact same applies to Luke Trainor. Luke Trainor is an interesting one. Like earlier in the year, he was considered a top 3 or 4 prospect. I think mid-year, I had West Coast picking at pick 4 and taking Luke Trainor because we needed a key back. And I have changed my mind on what we should do with our first pick anyway. He's also slid down the order a little bit. So he's described a little bit more as a Jordan Ridley third tall intercepting defender, which doesn't make him a true key back and probably unsuited to West Coast really. But he is actually a pretty good talent and really good attacking foot skills as well, and a great intercept player. And I think he would make just about any team better. But it's not the sort of the position that I would want to spend one of our only picks on in this year's draft. Bit of concussion doubt on Trainor as well. So he's probably one that I think he could slide past our pick at this current rate in time. But technically, he's a tall defender, and he would add something that we do lack in terms of ball use out of the back 50, but maybe Ryan Marriott can be that. I've got 3 to go. Taj Hotton is actually a player I really like, and I do think on talent would be a great selection for us. The downside with Taj Hotton is he did an ACL earlier this year, and so it's really hard to place where he's going to fall in the draft, and that becomes also a bit of a question around risk. Do we want to pick a guy who hasn't played a lot of footy this year? I mean, we've done that in the past, but I'm not too sure if we'll do that with Hotton. He was a bit more of a medium-sized forward that right before his injury, I think started to move up the field, accumulate the footy, and genuinely prove himself as a midfielder. So we got a midfielder who is genuinely also a good forward with good forward craft, and I think there's a lot of talent, and he's also a high impact per possession player, like a high half forward who can accumulate the footy. Absolutely, that is something we would like. I've heard through the grapevine, Taj Hotton is one of 3 Vic Metro players that don't want to leave WA. So I'm just going to put that out there. I don't know if it's true, but I'm just going to be honest with you. That is something I've heard around Taj Hotton. Joe Berry, this is another interesting one. I really like this kid. You could just make the argument we don't really need him. The reason I think we could still pull the trigger, potentially, is that he's not like a conventional small forward who just crumbs and kicks goals like, say, an Owies. Berry is very much a high half forward that can push up the ground, win the footy, and also has a lot of impact. So he can play off a half-back flank, he can play on the wing, but he really pushes up the ground, sort of like a Dylan Moore does at Hawthorn, and he kicks goals. So I think on talent, this kid's really good, and I wouldn't complain if we took him. I don't think it's like the right position technically. You'd love someone who can genuinely become a midfielder, which I don't know if Berry will, but he is much more than simply just being a small forward. He's a quality high half forward who can kick goals too. So I think whichever club ends up with Joe Berry will be very happy with him. He may not be 100% right for West Coast, but he's probably going to be available. We'll be close to. Great running power as well, and I think that is something that would appeal to us. Then there's Murphy Reid, who is a player that shot up and then shot back down again. So Murphy is a smaller midfielder around the 180 centimetre mark from Vit Metro. Had a great champs, like he was hitting the scoreboard and winning the footy as a midfielder. I think he had at least one game where he had 31 and kicked 3. I think that was against South Australia. So a little while ago, I didn't think he'd be available at pick 12. It seems like he's sliding a little bit. Now, again, I'll reference The Age, who did their own sort of rankings where they consulted recruiters, and this is quoting the article. It says, most recruiters who spoke to this masthead, being The Age, rated him as a more of a mid-teens pick because of his lack of height and leg speed. So if he's not quite a midfielder because he's too small, is he quite a small forward? If he's a small forward, probably goes later in the draft. However, he won All-Australian in the champs. He won Metro's MVP award. He is a pretty proven high production little player and has good talent. But I think it is a chance that we don't go down that route. I suppose you could say every other player that I've picked here has some doubt over becoming a midfielder. So you don't want to apply a double standard here to Murphy Reid. I think on talent, he would be a decent pick. However, there is a rumour online that he's telling clubs he doesn't want to leave Victoria. And I don't want to perpetuate this sort of stuff, but if this is something that I've heard and it seems to be consensus, then if I'm going to say that I don't particularly want us to take Murphy Reid in the draft, I feel like I need to explain to you why. But bear in mind, it is conjecture, it is a little bit of rumor, but to be fair, every time I've seen a rumor around a player not wanting to leave their home state, they've either been picked up by a team in their home state or they've left. It's a shit result for the draft in general, but this is not the time for me to talk about that in depth. So there you have it. Those are 8 prospects I think we can pick. I mean, we can trade back into this draft, get 2 of them. Like if we got Travalia and Lindsay or Allen or 2 of those 3 types and pick a key back a little bit later, I think that's a pretty good draft haul. Finding a suitor to trade with us for our future first or future second or however will be the tricky part. It will be the tricky part. I've actually done a video that should be out sometime today, maybe before this video, or maybe just after, exploring the possibility of pick swaps on the True Footy YouTube channel. In that video, I explore a potential deal with GWS for their pick 21. It is possible we deal with Richmond, but they're probably going to have other teams like Essendon also trying to get there as well. So that'll do for now, guys. Those are my thoughts on pick 12 as it currently stands, which becomes pick 15 on draft night. Hopefully we get another top 20 selection or top 25 selection, and I will continue to do draft content around that. But it'd be nice to get the deal done before the draft. I'd like to know what picks we hold beforehand, but we have no power over that. So let me know in the comments what you think. Is there anyone I missed that you think should be contended for this pick? Otherwise, I thank you for watching. Thanks for being subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.